Good evening. What a great group. I'm Julián Zugazagoitia, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you on behalf of our board chair, Shirley Bush-Hellsberg, and on behalf of the volunteers and the staff of the Nelson-Atkins. Tonight, we're very pleased to have Stéphane Martin deliver a keynote address as we begin a journey on a very important symposium called A State of the Field Convening the Future of African Art. The goal of this convening, which kickoffs tonight, is to develop an understanding, a set of reflections, to set some priorities as we in the world of art, encyclopedic museums in particular, collect, interpret, and display African art from what we would call classical African art to contemporary African art. It is a major undertaking, and it has been spearheaded by Christina van Dijk and with the help at the Nelson-Atkins of Rachel Kabukala. And we know that the field results will be very important as we begin a discussion, a conversation. It is not really the ending of anything as much as it is the beginning of a reflection of how the center heart of the US can be in dialogue with continental Africa. So it is both a geopolitical chance that we're taking on the one side, and on the other side also, it talks about how global art is and how this time is perfect for those conversations. We have over 35 participants from across the world, and I will not take time from Stéphane by naming them all, but they're all here, and I just want to wave and thank you and encourage all of you to be Kansas City welcome to all of our guests. And I hope that you will all join us also on Saturday from 5 to 7 here at the museum, in which we will be concluding the symposium. And that conclusion panel will be led by the great Jonetta Cole, and who is the Director Emerita of the Smithsonian National Museum for African Art, and one of the greatest persons I know. So that would be a great way to just continue this conversation and see some of the results that we will be sharing. It is also my great pleasure to thank the generous support that we have received both for the Picasso and African Art exhibition, but also for this symposium in particular, from our most generous supporters. And I want to mention first and foremost Shirley and Burnett Hellsberg, the Whole Family Foundation, Bank of America, and the Richard Stern Foundation for the Arts. Please, a big hand for all of them. And so tonight it is my real pleasure to welcome once again to the Nelson-Atkins and to the Atkins Auditorium, Stéphane Martin, who's a tremendous colleague and friend. Many of you remember that without the loans of the Musée du Quai Branly, the Picasso exhibition could not be possible. But more importantly, I think most of you remember the Plains Indians exhibition. The Plains Indians exhibition was really began when Stéphane Martin was daring to cross all the US in a car, stops in Kansas City to discuss with Gaylord, and all of a sudden, many years later, that exhibition premiered in Paris, had its best presentation here, always, and then finished at a small place in New York called the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And anyway, but in any case, Stéphane Martin was, I think, also, and what is important to remember, is the person who created the Musée du Quai Branly. The Musée du Quai Branly, I think, has surprised everyone in the field because it has not only established itself very quickly as the foremost exhibition space for art of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, but also because it has become one of Paris' favorite places. And so it has both engaged the scientific community, it has engaged the art lovers, and it has embraced the world. So it's celebrating its 10 years, and I think what today we want to celebrate is the mastermind behind a museum that is a great success. So please welcome our great friend, Stéphane Martin.
everybody. Thank you very much. I feel so comfortable in this museum that at some point it's a little bit dangerous, you know, when you feel too homey, too comfortable. And so I hope I won't get too boring tonight. It's a big responsibility to open this symposium. What I'd like to do tonight is certainly not to explain how Branly is a wonderful and perfect place. I think I'll do partly the contrary. It's to settle a few issues which I think we are all addressing now in museums all around the world. Quai Branly Museum is now 12 years old, and the whole thing started on a very political basis. I think it's interesting to remember that. Maybe time did fade away, but before of being a cultural project, it was a political project which was launched by Jacques Chirac when he started to be president. So whatever your opinion is about of France, you can find it very arrogant, as usual, that France wants to have one big museum dealing with something else than French culture, or a real geopolitical ambition, since Paris is a city where there's so many museums, and therefore where museums sends messages. And the whole idea behind Jacques Chirac was to have one of those big museums devoted to the others, devoted to non-Western European culture. This idea actually was backed by the footstep of what Georges Pompidou did in Pompidou Center. If you're familiar with Paris, you know that Pompidou Center is not just a regular, although it's a beautiful contemporary art museum, it's much more than that. It's kind of a tool that was given to my generation specifically to try to understand the big question of modernity. What is to be modern? Is Prince modern? Is Pierre Boulez modern? Is abstraction the real modernity? Or is it rock and roll? Or is it design? Or is it architecture? So it's a very, very open-minded museum. It's a museum where curators have a very significant share and say, but they're not the alpha and omega of what happens in the museum. And that was the idea behind Jacques Chirac when he decided to create this museum. Also, something important is that this decision took place at a time where there was a real crisis in the question of representing the art of Africa. At the time where the plan for the Quai Branly were drawn up, the institutional representation of African art in France was really in crisis. There were two museums at that time. The first one, of course, is the Musée de l'Homme, which itself had been created in 1937 out of a long lineage of museums. I mean, in Europe, museums don't pop up from nowhere. Le Musée de l'Homme was itself the son of Le Musée du Trocadéro, was the son of Le Musée des Colonies, who was the son of Le Musée Américain du Louvre, and the first version of the Louvre, which was built by Louis-Philippe and before him by Napoleon. So there was a long line of museums. The first pieces in the collection, which are now in the Quai Branly, were officially gathered by the government in the 15th century. So it was at that time an aging new museum, which was something like 50 years old, and which was really ending its road for several reasons. The main reason, I think, was really because the way they were representing African culture was not fitting anymore with the spirit of the visitors. There are two problems. The first problem is the tendency of being encyclopedic. Those museums were really built directly in the spirit of the French encyclopedists of the 18th century, with the idea of showing everything, even the name, Musée de l'Homme, Museum of Mankind, which means that we are going to encompass everything and to explain you everything, the holistic explanation of humanity should be in this space. Another major problem of, and you might have a look, even although the picture, the cases that you see here are the first version, the one which were extreme modern at the opening in 37. But when you look at them, and especially at the end of the life of the Musée de l'Homme, it was extremely sad. The whole philosophy behind those presentations was, we are going to show you something which is dying. We're going to show you the last natural people. We're going to show you the last people connected to an age that is fading away, which of course is totally stupid. And another, of course, specific issue for France was the connection with colonialism. And you have to remember that those big museums, Paris, London, Berlin, Brussels, were expanded largely within the context of colonization as a tool to convince the citizen, which at first were not so much in favor of colonization. If you go back to your book of history, you will remember that colonization was mostly a leftist idea. The conservative parties in most of those countries in Europe were against colonization. Colonization was sending, soldiers abroad, was meaning war, meaning losing blood, and why? And so the colonist idea was really more a leftist idea, and those museums were supposed to be tools helping to convince the French people that the colonial adventure was worth getting into. Of course, economic interests were not the only reason of building those museums, but obviously one great chance was lost at the end of 19th century when, for several reasons I won't have time to get into deeply, most of the philosophers and the scientists, with a few exceptions like Apollinaire or Fénéon, were convinced that although you don't need any explanation to enjoy the vision of Vinci painting, for example, to understand the beauty of the interest of a Mayombe sculpture or of Teotihuacan sculpture, you need scientific information. And therefore, at the end of 19th century, starting in France around 1890, yes, different museums were built in which, like Le Louvre, were housed the Western art, and new museums were built to house non-Western art. So, of course, as any kind of project, there were different approaches to try to change a few things, and the main one was that the fact that André Malraux in 1960s was totally aware of the fact that the Musée de l'Homme was dangerously aging and decided to use an old building to create a new museum, the MAO, Musée des Arts d'Afrique, d'Asie et d'Océanie, which was done along his philosophy and was supposed to showcase specifically mostly African art and oceanic art, with the idea of showing their grandeur and the quality of the artistic value of those pieces. Truth is that it never really worked. It didn't really work for several reasons. I guess the main reason was the building. The building was the former colonial museum, so that's a bad start, when you want to create a new vision. And the second reason were that basically it was the same people who were running both museums, and so the spirit within those museums were largely the same. So the whole story of Branly started in 97 when Chirac was elected Président de la République, and when he decided to start building this museum. Personally, I was appointed in 98, so that's at a very early stage of the process. So one of the biggest part of the controversy was that we know that this museum is going to be an aesthetic museum. It's not going to be a really scientific or anthropological museum. It's going to be purely formal and purely aesthetical. And the fact is that on this pics, you see most people who were involved at the early stage of Branly, the President Chirac, Jacques Kershach, who was a famous dealer and collector and art lover, who was a friend of the president, who was really the soul behind the project. And of course, he was extremely suspected to have artistic taste. My God, he had artistic taste rather than scientific taste. Then this guy here was a businessman who was close to the president and helped the project. And this guy here was a curator, is a curator, but a curator of contemporary art from the Pompidou Center. And truly, all those people, including myself, at some point had been working or had been connected with Pompidou Center, had a very strong connection with the spirit of the Pompidou. So I spent terrible time within 2 or 3 years fighting what I thought was a stupid fight to be fought. Will the museum be scientific or aesthetic? Which, from my point of view, is the stupidest of the stupidest question you can ask. For several reasons. The first reason is that a museum built up aesthetic. I mean, what else is a museum if it's not a beautiful building with beautiful lights and case, which transform things which get inside the museum into work of art? I mean, if you put a collection of dresses within the museum, immediately they become objects, they become sculpture, they become pieces of art. So even if you dislike it, even if you stand strongly that objects should be seen from only their, let's say, traditional background or scientific or traditional use with no perception of their artistic value, it is just impossible because the museum produces artistic value whenever a piece is exhibited inside its walls. Same thing for design, and I could multiply the number of examples the same way. Another significant happening during the 20th century was, of course, the alteration of aesthetics through different branches of contemporary art. The fact that Duchamp, the Dadaist, the Surrealist, Joseph Beuys, like here, or minimalism, conceptual art, has totally changed our perception of what is beautiful, what is supposed to be art, what is supposed to be sculpture. One of the main concerns of some of the scientists who were involved in the beginning of the Quai Branly were, well, this kind of objects, for example, which are mostly magical objects. I guess many of them know what they are, although they're not. Yeah, this one even is African art, so it was from Brazil, but it's a Teke piece. Those pieces, I was told, are not beautiful enough. People won't see them from a beauty point of view, which is wrong. Which is wrong because of that. Because when you grew up knowing that that was something you could find beauty into, I don't know if all of you find beauty into, personally I do, but if you don't, I mean, if you do, you will find beauty in those two. So this transformation of what is aesthetic, what is beauty, what is perception, what is aging, what is the function of the museum, all those converge to totally transform those old museums into things which were just not adequate to what people were thinking, to the, I would say, the cultural situation and cultural position of potential viewers. So we had to take some choices for museography, and I'll get a little bit more specific about African art from that point of view. We had a specific situation in Paris which the president absolutely wanted to answer prior to addressing the question of Quai Branly Museum. That was Le Louvre. Jacques Chirac once told me, you know, Le Louvre is not a museum, it's a church. People go at church. They go on their knees, they pray, they worship what they're told are supposed to be the true God of beauty. And it's true that in Paris, 80%, well, first 80% of the visitors of the Louvre are not French, and 80% of the visitors of the Louvre are not going to any other museum. So if you don't grab them within Le Louvre, if you don't convince them that what they see in Le Louvre, which is usually Mona Lisa and Egyptian sculpture, is not the only, I mean, it's not the only apex of human culture, well, you lose them. And in a way, you cheat with them. So for that reason, and for that specific reason, the president wanted this room, which is not so big, it's about 10,000 square feet, and in which there are about only 110 pieces, all masterpieces, which are only there to remember people who eventually get to that room. Most of the people who are going to that room are people getting lost. They, very few of them actually took a ticket to, and I've, so many times I've been witnessing, it's really fascinating. When I'm sitting at the entrance and I see people flying away. Oh my God, where am I going? That's not what I want to see. I want to see Mona Lisa. Leave me alone, African sculpture. I saw that several times. But thanks God, it's not always the case. And I've also seen people who were totally mesmerized, stop down, sit down, started, you know, watching, taking pictures, sometimes making drawings. And so I think this room is really important in the context of Paris and of Le Louvre. Then the other choice, which really I'm extremely grateful, and that was really Jacques Chirac personally, was to decide that this museum, which after all will be the only museum in Paris not dealing with the French history, how proud, how, you know, famous for that, le coq gaulois and the rooster and whatever, the Général de Gaulle, la mousse au chocolat, la résistance, whatever, all the things that the French are so proud to be, we are going to devote the latest pristine piece of land in the most expensive neighborhood in Paris that the French government was still owning. This place won't be a Musée du Général de Gaulle, but will be a museum devoted to everyone but ourselves. So that was really a daring choice. The second choice was to, of course, but that's not as daring, was to choose contemporary architecture, because today a new museum, and Nelson-Atkins knows it, means great architecture and daring architecture. And then one point which was really maybe my personal touch in the project was, and I still remember the face of the architect when I told him, I want a dramatic, theatrical approach. He said, what do you mean? I said, there is no reason why, when you go to the Louvre, worship on your knees, don't forget that, Mona Lisa, or the Victory of Samothrace, you will approach the Victory of Samothrace as you would approach a queen. She's at the top of a huge stair, you know, and certainly not on the equal level than you. And a museum, this is something I've been convinced since I've been a kid, is a theater. Nothing within a museum is natural. Nothing within a museum has been made to be there. Maybe Guernica and le Radeau de la Méduse, or 2 or 3 other pieces, but there are really exceptions. And it's part of the game. What I call the game is the relation that a museum will build with its audience to create something between the audience and what they're going to see. And dramaticism and grandeur and a dramatic showcase is something that we consider as absolutely normal for our masterpieces. And what were we doing in the Musée de l'Homme? We were exhibiting wonderful sculpture from Congo or from Gabon, with a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of wire just to give a bit explanation in dark cases, because that was supposed to be scientific. So with Jean Nouvel, we decided that we wanted an approach that would respect the same code. Well, that was mainly the most important point. Respect for African or oceanic art, the same code that we would give to what people usually regard as masterpieces of human community. So that's what happened, and of course, this has some limits. This has some ambiguity, which I don't want to conceal. The first thing is that in the French tradition, and in a way, we had to respect the French tradition of museum. We have, and maybe we're wrong. I'm starting more and more to think we're wrong. We are obsessed with authenticity. We cannot have any kind of reproduction. So we cannot showcase things we don't have. For example, if I have one engraving, let's say a Hogarth engraving, and I don't have the other one, well, I don't showcase my engraving, but I will rather die than showcase a reproduction of my Hogarth engraving. So it means that it limits the possibility of having a deeply scenarized storytelling approach of the museum. It's mostly, it gives the downside is that it gives a kind of a coldness to what we display, because we only display the pieces, information if we have them. If we don't have information, we don't give information. But there are many topics, like, for example, slavery, slave trade, for which we have few traces, few objects, and which are not present in the permanent collection. So for that reason, and maybe other aesthetical reasons, we had a mixed reception at the opening of the museum. That's where I made my worst enemy, Michael Kimmelman, who really, I think 15 years after that, still hates the Quai Branly and his director, which is nice in a way. I'm proud of that. And yeah, that gives you a little bit of the kind of approach we have for the permanent exhibition. You see, it's pretty cold, and in a way, I think it's good it's cold. It means that we show the pieces, as much as we can, with a little bit of drama to enhance their significance and to make proud people that, especially people connected to those pieces. Also to enhance their aesthetic value, which is so obvious in many times, and we provide the information we have. But we don't, most of the time, build up a real storytelling about those pieces. Another downside is that, as I said, we just show what we have and we don't show what we don't have. So it means that we provide a representation of the world, which is mostly, and in a way, I think it's very interesting, it's mostly a colonial representation of the world, because it showcases, you know, small Asia. We never had much colony in Asia, so we didn't bring so much things from Asia. A big Oceania, a rather small America, and of course a large Africa. We tried as much as we could to have a few part of this permanent collection trying to be a little bit more storytelling. One thing which was highly important for me is that one of the worst prejudice, I think, that many people in Europe have regarding African history is that Africa, and even one of our former presidents said something like that, Africa doesn't really have history, which is really make me ashamed just you know, saying that. And we wanted, especially for Abomey and Benin City, to make a kind of a parallel between the way that a young French, like a young English guy or girl, learned the story of kings, you know, King Louis XIII, Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI. Each has a different style of chair, apparently, and until he becomes beheaded. And we know the wives, we know the princes, we know, well, this kind of stupid and totally unfashionable anymore way of learning history, in a way, I regret that, but we believe, a lot of people believe, this is typical and specific to Westerners. And we wanted to show that, for example, the Benin Kingdom was functioning in something which was very close to that. And so we try to do that also for the Abomey section. And to be honest with you, I told you I was going to be honest with you tonight, I'm not totally satisfied with what we did. And we could have done better. So here are a few of the bad opinion that some people had about the museum, which it's always good to have bad opinion because it helps you fight and try to improve. But honestly, and maybe also I'm wrong, this is really also a kind of a personal touch that I insisted on having on the museum. I do believe in the value of special or temporary exhibition, because I believe that what you can express, first when you're doing a temporary exhibition, you have to get in front of the curtain. You have to put your name in front of it. You're not one person from the museum. You're Gaylord Torrance doing Plains Indians. You have to express yourself. You have to sign. You have to assume your point of view. You're like someone publishing a book at a publisher house. And I enjoy the fact of having a museum, of thinking about a museum as a publishing house. Of course, you won't publish authors you don't respect. You don't publish authors you think are not good authors, but you definitely would publish authors you don't totally share their approach, or you don't are totally convinced they're 100% right. But this diversity, I think, is something that is absolutely necessary. And the pattern of those different exhibitions is, I think, a better reflection of something approaching not the reality, but something approaching the complexity of the real situation, that whatever you could do on a permanent and collegial and co-organized with a group, with all the loss that you get when you work in a team, sorry to say that, that you don't lose in a temporary exhibition. So I personally decided that half the surfaces that have been made available by Jean Nouvel, our architect, would be devoted for temporary exhibition. We not exactly have, let's say, 40%. We have a little less than 100,000 square feet of of exhibitions altogether. And about 40% of that whole surface are scattered in several, one big and some smaller, each with a kind of a personality, spaces for special or temporary exhibition. For temporary exhibition, I wanted to establish a few rules since the very beginning. The first rule would be that a curator would be an author, and that he will assume, of course, with the help and the control of the museum, but he will assume full responsibility. And that his approach would be his own approach, and that, for example, a curator who's not scholarly, totally in line with the permanent curator of the field he is working in the museum. I hope you understand me. I mean, if you're not in the same school of thinking than someone who is in the permanent collection, it doesn't mean that you will not do your own exhibition the way you want it, because this is the way of having diversity. The second rule is to get sure from that. I decided that half of our temporary exhibition, at minimum, half of the temporary exhibition would be curated by people from outside the exhibition, the institution, outside of the museum. And sorry, Gaylord is in front of me, so you're going to be an example another time. But Gaylord Torrance was invited to curate an exhibition on Plains Indian at the museum, and I told him I'll introduce you to the guy who is the curator for the American collection of the museum. You can ask him anything you want, but you're the master. If you don't agree, if he says, that's not my approach, you say, well, you have other opportunity to expose your approach, but this is my time. I express my point of view. And I think that's important. I was telling a story earlier that we had a small exhibition. Checking my time, I'm still good. We had a small exhibition on tattoo culture, and I wanted this tattoo exhibition to be done by people who believe, right or wrong, that tattoo is important, tattoo is nice, tattoo is beautiful, and there's some good artists and bad artists. I didn't want someone who would be an anthropologist of tattoo art that would take tattoo from above, that would comment on tattoo. I want someone who would be, reading tattoo magazines and believe that, right or wrong, it's a form of art. So we asked a couple of friends, two ex-punk people, to do a tattoo show that the whole thing would be tattoo is a major art. And I was very surprised, and the exhibition was quite successful, but I was surprised when the exhibition started to tour and it went to several museums, especially in America, that it was impossible not to have the exhibition transform to satisfy the local curator. I won't get into detail to be offensive, and there is no real offense, but I went to an American museum where our tattoo exhibition was presented, and the first room was a huge Dayak tattoo room. I said, well, Dayak is a very small part of this show. Why Dayak? And the director told me, well, my curator, he loves Dayak. So there is no way to have a tattoo exhibition if we don't have a huge Dayak section. He would never agree an exhibition to get into his museum without a Dayak section. I said, well, it's not his exhibition. It's another people exhibition. And I try to enforce this rule that curators will bear the responsibilities. And we had some exhibitions that are really totally different in approach. Some are aesthetic, some are anthropologic, some are purely very, very personal. And we invited people with extremely different background to curate, but I mean not to superficially curate, to be really the head of the curating team. For example, I don't know if you're into soccer, but this guy is a very famous French soccer player, a wonderful guy, who created a foundation to fight against racism in France, and he developed an interest in something terrible that we had in America and in Europe at the beginning of 19th century, which were human zoo, where people living a perfectly normal life were asked to strip down and to suppose return to traditional life behind cage to be exhibited to kids. So he did this exhibition, L'Invention du Sauvage, on human zoo, and he had, of course, never did an exhibition before, and Liliane was a wonderful curator. Claire Denis is a French movie maker. She makes quite experimental movie, and she has no specific experience with Africa, but she wanted to do an exhibition she called Diaspora, and the topic, this is against the head of Liliane Thuram, which is here. She wanted to do an exhibition about African people living outside of Africa and being successful in different fields like haute couture or science or economics, and to give a vision of Africa, a very positive vision of Africa, and Africa as the center of the economic exchange of the world. And maybe you know more this lady over there, Marla Burns, from the UCLA Fowler Museum, who also did a series of groundbreaking show at the museum. She will, next year, we will have the honor of hosting the show that she will open in Los Angeles in June called Striking Iron, a very, I think, groundbreaking show on African iron. So we have people from very, and also this is interesting because Hélène Leloup is a dealer. Normally, museums don't like to have dealers as curators, but dealers knows a lot of things. And so we thought it could be interesting to have a dealer, someone who took a lot of pieces out of Africa also, to curate an exhibition and give a point, point of view. Some of those exhibitions, and this is Barbara's, for example, exhibition when, at the time she was in Vienna, some of the exhibition are just purchased or hosted. There is an international market for exhibitions, so in some case we trust the project from a book and we host the exhibition. In other cases, which are more rare, we think about a topic and we try to find the one that could fill the story we're looking for. That was the story, for example, for exhibition with Lilian Thuram. That's another example of, that's an exhibition that was curated by Marla Burns. That's also something interesting, which was reviving an exhibition. This Lega exhibition has been done at the Fowler 15 years ago, and so we did a kind of a new twist and a new version with a new book, updating the old catalog of that exhibition. This is an exhibition that was curated by a Belgian priest, and that's another example of an exhibition curated this time by someone from within the museum. The head curator of the museum, Yves Le Fur, did this huge Gabon exhibition. So from what I've shown you, you can see already something that we didn't achieve yet, to have an African-born curator curating an exhibition in Paris, which is something that I really feel like a failure and that we should do. And I hope in a close future we will do that. But we did exhibition in Africa. Another thing which I think is important is another strong point of our mission is to spread the interest for African art outside of a country who are already familiar with African art. We did, for example, this exhibition in Mali with some of the most important pieces of the collection of the museum, and that was curated by, actually, we had an exhibition curated by an African curator, because he also curated the version in Paris. Samuel Sidibé did create the African version and the Paris version of this Chihuahua exhibition, but it's, in a way, it's a culture that is very close to him. We did also this exhibition about présence africaine in Senegal, which was a very difficult endeavor because the Senegalese president at that time didn't want a French museum to do an exhibition, a successful exhibition in Senegal. That's another story. I'll get into that if I have a chance to. But so we had to do it for my friend, the Senegalese guy I met at the University Cheikh Anta Diop. So, you know, in Fan, it's not the easiest place to find when you're in Dakar, but I think it was an interesting approach of Présence Africaine, which is one of the best magazine or review I've ever read. And even more specific, we introduced African art in part of the world where it had never been showcased. When we did the first exhibition of African art, it was in Singapore. And I remember the people from the National Museum, they said, okay, so we have to build up a hut in the garden. I said, what do you want to build a hut? But the African, they live in huts. So finally, I convinced them not to build any hut. And instead, we asked the Picasso Museum to bring some Picasso and to show them that that was really the core of the modernity. And I think they totally changed their perception. And after that, the exhibition went to Beijing, the exhibition went to Shanghai in different forms. And again, in every of those museums and cities, it was the first time. In Mexico, it went to Mexico, it went to Bahrain. It was the first time that people were looking at one exhibition that was only devoted to African art. You have to remember, here you live in a country where there's so many encyclopedic museums that 90.9% of the museums which are built in the world today are museums exclusively dedicated to the local culture. Parle-moi de moi, il y a que ça qui m'intéresse. Talk to me about myself. That's the only thing I want to know about. It's horrible, but it's what many people still believe. And of course, a significant target for us is the diaspora and the people from immigrants' roots living in France. And a lot of them, of course, don't go to museums, or they go to museums as prisoners with their schools, you know, tightly chained by the teacher. And I'm not sure it's the best way to convince them to come back, although it has also its value, not the chain, but coming to the museum. So we go to them, and we try to do real exhibition. I know all the virtue of the digital museum, digital data, and everything, but I personally believe that there is nothing as striking as to be in front of the real thing and the real people. So we spend a lot of money to be able to bring actual valuable, and very often some of the most valuable artifacts in places where they shouldn't be, even legally they shouldn't be. I mean, in commercial centers, in banks, in places like that, just to give the people the experience of being with the real thing and to be proud of what have been achieved by people they're close to. If I've still a little bit of time, I would like to now switch to a very hot topic at that day, which is acquiring African art. Why do we still have to acquire African art? Sometimes I wonder, but curators love acquiring. If they don't acquire, they feel that they're going to die away, and in a way, it's true. I mean, a collection has to be kept alive. One of the main differences between Europe and America is that most of the acquisition in Europe are directly made by the museum, with money they get either from sponsors or with money they get from the government. Sometimes sponsors give art, but most of the art is directly purchased by the museum and not given by the collector. Although, again, recently, for example, we got a huge collection from a major collector. So we have an acquisition budget of about $1.5 million a year. And of course, there are long committees, I won't get into that, in which now about a third of the seats are occupied by people from the country of origin of the pieces. And as much as we are able, we try to trace the objects and to get sure that they're in line, let's say, in line with the legal expectation of the countries of origin. You have to remember that, contrarily of, especially in a colonial country like France, most of the pieces that were, I mean, most of the important pieces that were bought by French museum after the independence in the 60s or the 70s, that does not mean that we didn't do bad things, but you have to understand that most of those pieces were brought in Europe by African. The famous Jenenke sculpture, which is one of the most expensive pieces we ever bought, was sold in an hotel in Paris in the 1960s by delegates of a Malian village who wanted it to be sold to Actually, they got a garage in Mali with the money they could get from that sculpture. An example of a few of our most recent acquisition. And of course, sometimes it doesn't work by far. This is the famous litigation about the Nock terracotta. When Jacques Kershach wanted some Nock terracotta for the Louvre, I told him, you shouldn't do that. I mean, they're very hot objects. They're on the red list of UNESCO. They have been looted quite recently. We shouldn't buy them. His argument was strong. He said, you know, this piece, for example, is basically a contemporary of Pericles. So the first thing that people, the people read on the labels in the Louvre is the age of the piece. If you can tell them that this sculpture was made in the 4th century BC, of course people will have a different approach to African art. It's not only feather and people dancing in the rainforest. It's just great, great master, top sculpture. So we asked the authorization of the government of Nigeria. The Nigerian president came to the museum, but we learned hardly that you cannot get this kind of authorization this way. I mean, the law is the law, and what the president of the Nigeria agreed was not in line with his own regulation. So eventually an agreement was settled, and those pieces were given back to Nigeria, and now they're on loan for 25 years from the Federation of Nigeria to the French government. And of course, the question of restitution, I guess you've heard what the French president said in Cotonou. But I'd like to quote him exactly, because very often his quotation has not been accurately reported. He said exactly, African heritage cannot solely exist in private collection and European museums. African heritage must be showcased not only in Paris, but also in Dakar, in Lagos, in Cotonou. This will be one of my priorities within 5 years. I want, etc., etc., etc. So it's not such a big thing. I mean, what is said is not, we must stop collecting. We must jail the collectors. We must empty the museum. What he said, and what I totally share, is that the geography of museum is deeply changing. I was telling a few of them that when I started, the first museum I worked in was the Pompidou Center. I remember that year, one curator of the Pompidou Center wanted a plane ticket to go to Florida. And the director of the Pompidou Center refused and said, Florida, my God, Florida is not on the contemporary map. Go to California, go to New York, but Florida, you go for beaches to Florida. You don't go for art. And of course, everyone knows that Florida now is on the map. So what I mean is that this map is expanding. The Chinese are building about one new museum every month. And places on Earth, like the Middle East, which were not on the map, they are on the map. So there is no curse for Africa not to be on the map. And I think the question of ownership is totally linked to the excitement of those projects. And if we can build exciting projects, the question of what we will put inside of them, I'm sure we will find ways through public collection, and I'm sure also through generous donator. I know you're puzzled by the conception of the French property. The French property is extremely well covered because the non-public property is not so well covered. I was telling Julian, if I steal his watch today and hide it for 3 years, in 3 years it's mine. He can't say anything. So we try not to do the same with the public property. Hold on to it. So it means that public property can be chased through history. For example, there's two funny example, though they're not African. This, for example, is part of the Cathedral of Shaft. It was found back 5 years ago by a French dealer in a big crumble of stones. He made all the research and proved that it was part of what we call the jubé, which was a traditional separation, a kind of a shelter between the altar and the audience. And he tried to sold it to the Louvre, and the Louvre says, sorry, this is ours, it's part of the cathedral. The dealer said, no, it's been destroyed by the bishops before the French Revolution, and before the Revolution, they were not owned by the state, they were owned by the church. So that was free property, it's not the government. Recently, the government made new expertise and said, no, yes, they were broken away by the church, but they were used as floor plates in the cathedral, so they're part of the cathedral. They were still in the floor of the cathedral under Napoleon, so we want them, we claim them. This one is in the Met. It was sold, and obviously he should never have sold it, by the priest of Saint-Thirier just after the French government, when there was the sharing between priesthood and the government. He took over the relics, the bones inside, so which he thought was valuable, and sold the sculpture to Vanderbilt. So now it's in the Metropolitan, and the French says no, it's still owned by the government. Of course, the chance to get it back are thin. But it's just to give you an example. Or another example is that this Indian bag was found in a very remote museum, not connected with Quai Branly, totally by chance. This sculpture was found in a private collection in Belgium, and eventually it was sold it was stolen in the Musée de l'Homme in the 70s, and very wisely enlarged. The feather here were added by the person who obviously stole it, and then transfer it to an owner who, of course, was of good faith, who bought it through a very famous Belgian dealer, and never knew that the piece had been stolen, and then it was given back to the museum 1 or 2 years ago. And here are the pieces from Benin, which are now under litigation, and I've been appointed to go to Benin recently to meet the president and check what we can do. And my perception, if we can do something, if they had to be given, just for the pleasure of giving them on, I'm not extremely excited. Although in France, the artifact within a public museum are not owned by the museum. So I'm not the owner. I have no say on what their destiny is. It's the parliament who has a say. But indeed, I'm not highly interested in giving them if there is not behind a scientific project. But if there is a project, if those objects, which I truly believe are not the property of one group of humans, they're the property of everyone who, for different interests, wants to see them. Is the Vatican the owner of the Sixtine Chapel? No, the Sixtine Chapel is owned by all humanity. So if there is a project, I think it's but on scientists of all over the world to build up scientific cooperation. Here are two very different examples. The very, very wealthy Louvre Abu Dhabi, which was started as mostly as a token for real estate development. It was, part of the agreements that were offered to people that were induced to buy expensive villas. But over the process, it turned into a wonderful museum, not only because it's beautiful, but because inside of it work people who are more and more acting as we are all acting using people. And so I think this geography of new institution will increase. And the other example is a museum that I really like a lot. It's still empty. I think for not too much. It will be, full soon. It's the museum that the Chinese government built in Dakar behind the railway station, and which will be a museum of I don't know how to translate it in English. Musée de l'homme noir, des civilisations de l'homme noir. It's a great building. It has great possibilities. Up till now, I think there were the talks about what it should be have been a little bit, let's say, talkative and not enough active, but it has a great potential. And it's through institutions like that that we can develop new stuff and that we can cooperate. I know that Julian shares some of those and a lot of those approach, and this museum, the Nelson-Atkins, which have always been an extremely active and modern museum, would be a wonderful partner. I don't mean by that we need pieces of our collection, of your collection. That's not the real point. The point is mostly willingness, enthusiasm, not regard African Museum as cursed, but regard African Museum as shining new places to be developed, helped, and enhanced with our experience and just our cooperation. And I'm sure that if we gather again in, let's say, 10 years, there will be a bunch of incredible institutions on the African continent. Thanks a lot.